Well, welcome everybody to GeoHug. So before we kick off today's session, I would like to take this time to acknowledge the traditional lands which we're all coming from today. I live on the beautiful lands of the Gadigal of the people of the Aurora Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to the elders past, present, and future. And yes, I am thrilled that we have Mathias Burisch joining us today. So Mathias is an associate professor and head of the Mineral Systems Analysis Group in the Department of Geology and Geological Engineering at the Colorado School of Mines. And his research focuses on a better understanding of geological processes that result in the formation, transformation, and preservation of ore deposits. And it is going to be brilliant hearing from him today about, I'm probably going to say this wrong, the
Greisen
deposits and their critical mineral endowment. So this is going to be a fantastic session. I hope you all enjoy it. And yeah, get your chats and questions ready because we'll open up the floor at the end. But yes, thank you so much, Mathias, for joining. It's awesome having you here.
Thanks for the invitation. It's my pleasure.
Brilliant. But yeah, what got you into geology to begin with?
My story is probably different to the regular geology story. I mean, most people get into geology because they are like mineral hunting or something like that. Actually, I never wanted to become an academic, and I never wanted to study at a university. I wanted to become a cook or a chef, and that's how I started kind of my professional life.
Yeah.
And at some point, it I just realized that I miss nature and kind of so I needed something else.
Yeah.
So I worked a couple of jobs, and just by coincidence, a friend of mine studied geology, and he took me into his class, and I saw a metamorphic petrology class on Antarctica, and it really hooked me, and that's how I got into geology.
That is very cool. And you've done like a lot of travel with your journey. What are some highlights for you so far?
Travel highlights or
just career? Yeah. Where's it taken
my
you?
career highlights. I think what I enjoy most of with my job is working with students, supervising students. So I really enjoy the relationship, doing research, doing field work with students. That's a great privilege.
That's amazing. The future. So yeah, we're thanks for what you're doing. It's good. And I always ask every speaker to bring along some of their favorite pet rocks. So I'm very curious what you have for us today.
Okay, I got two. I got a small one. This one, it's an epithermal vein, and it's like all the black stuff is high-grade silver mineralization. It's ruby silver, different silver minerals. And why I like this rock is before I came here to Colorado School of Mines, I was an assistant professor at TU Bergakademie Freiberg in the eastern part of Germany. And this is actually from the Freiberg district. And the fun part was during my research on that district, an exploration company picked up that license and started drilling in that district. And during my lunch breaks, I could visit the drill rig within a 20 minutes car drive. That was a lot of fun.
Cool. I love that.
And the second piece is just like a nice rock. That's a spodumene pegmatite from Yellowknife in northwestern territories. And you can see the green, huge crystals of spodumene.
Wow. What a cool collection you brought for us today. Thank you for that. That is awesome.
Sure.
Well, yeah, if you want to jump in and share your screen and we'll get stuck into it. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Before I start, I would like to give some credit and thanks to my collaborators and co-authors. Particularly, you will see a lot of Dino Leopardi, who did his PhD with me. Also Marie Gulcher, Jens Gutzmer, Bernd Lehmann, Axel Gerdes, Thomas Dittrich, and Wojtek Sesulka. And on that image on the right, you can see how every field day should end with a good bottle of wine and a happy PhD student. And in this sense, I will just give you a brief overview on what I'm going to cover in my talk. I split up the talk in a general part, so I will introduce you to the fascinating deposit type or alteration type of Greisen alteration, and I will discuss some characteristics of these systems, and then I will just like really briefly in a nutshell discuss all the relevant ore-forming processes that kind of control the enrichment of certain elements. And the second part of my talk will be the specific part. So I'll give you an introduction on the European Variscides, and then the Erzgebirge and the Altenberg-Teplice Caldera, which hosts most of the lithium Greisens in the Erzgebirge. It's a subpart of the Erzgebirge. And then I will show you a little bit of the geology of the Zinnwald-Cinovec and the Sadisdorf systems. And then I'll conclude with more like a deposit scale conclusion, and then also like a wider or more like Beriscan scale conclusion. So this is how Greisen alteration looks. You see here different styles. This is like pervasive alteration. You can see that it preserves, in many cases, in the endocontact, it preserves the texture of the actual granite. So that was a granite, but it's completely replaced by this alteration style. Here you can see a volcanic rock, a rhyolite that is replaced or along a vein or fluid migration path way to Greisen alteration. This is again a pervasive endo-Greisen. And on the right side, you can see that also metamorphic rocks can be overprinted by Greisen, in this case also along veins or stockwork. The name Greisen, where it comes from, is not really clear and 100% documented, but there is like this myth out there that it comes from the German word Greis, which means old man. And usually, and I'll show you a picture in a few slides, the Greisens are usually related to S or A-type perluminous granites, and they are often have, because they have a lot of K-spar, they appear a little bit reddish, and after the alteration, they are really gray. And that's why kind of the name probably comes from an aging granite. Per definition, Greisen alteration is the replacement of feldspar by quartz, mica, and topaz. And this is a reaction that is related to acidic fluids. So that's the main distinction between, for instance, a skarn deposit or so, right? The fluids are extremely aggressive and acidic. You can see here I put on two diagrams that aim to classify Greisen systems. This is one from Kühne in the late 60s, and he suggested to classify them in a similar way than metamorphic rocks. So the mineral with the smallest modal abundance comes first, and then the one with the highest modal abundance comes last. But there are also other classifications that are shown here. So some classifications only use two minerals, such as quartz topaz, quartz mica, or only one mineral. On some classifications also just refer to the metal tenor. So my point here is that if you talk about Greisens, you just have to make clear what you're referring to, and there is no unique classification that is kind of appropriate for all, or that is used by all authors. And what is also important is that the style of Greisen alteration is highly variable within one deposit, and it changes from proximal to distal in some cases, or just also in terms of the protolith of the alteration. So talking about the causative source intrusions, I already mentioned that. So all Greisen systems are related to typically perluminous, really fluorine-rich ilmenite series leucogranites. That's already a pretty long description. What that means is usually they're K-spar rich, and you can see it here on those diagrams that this is a suite of different granites in the Erzgebirge, and those which are related to lithium mineralization, lithium tin, tungsten mineralization. So those lithium mica granites, they are these white boxes, and they have extremely higher fluorine contents and higher lithium contents compared to the other igneous rocks. They're often also referred to as tin granites or rare metal granites. However, it is kind of arbitrary because there's not a kind of one value that like a threshold. You say, okay, this rock has a tin content higher than this number, and then we can call it tin granite. So it's a pretty loose definition, and I will call these kind of suites of rocks rare metal granites in that talk. Although I have to point out that this term is kind of loosely defined. Usually they are moderately to strongly enriched in rubidium, cesium, I already mentioned fluorine and lithium, but also tin, tungsten, niobium, and tantalum. This is a nice diagram from Roma and Krona, where you can see rare metal granite systems. So these are basically all the red dots that you can see here are either Greisen system, rare metal granites, or LCT pegmatites. And they're basically all somehow related. I mean, it's not really well documented how they are related in each individual system, but somehow they're all related to rare metal granites and periluminous or rocks. And I have currently projects in Europe and in Yellowknife. So this is basically where I'm working in these systems. The metal tenor of those systems is really variable. I made this really rudimentary drawing here. So basically you have 5 different metal tenors, and you can have, usually you're somewhere in between in this pentagon. So what is pretty common is a lithium, tungsten, tin tenor, or any combination of those metals. And what I will explain later in more detail is that you have also certain variability in terms of metal tenor within one deposit. Just to give you an idea on the characteristics in terms of grade and tonnage of Greisen systems, I decided to show you lithium, but I could also show you tin or tungsten. But lithium is a hot topic in recently. And what you can see here is lithium grade and LE in weight percent, and the tonnage in million tons. And for example, here is the most famous example of a pegmatite, green bushes in green. So green, all the green circles are pegmatite deposits. The red the red dots are rare metal granite deposits. And all the orange dots are Greisen systems. And just for comparison, here's Theckerpass, it's a clay-hosted lithium deposit. But what you can see from the size, so the size of the circles is the total lithium content, and Zinnwald-Cinovec is actually, as a combined deposit, you will later know that it's divided by a border. So this is why I put in Zinnwald-Cinovec and Zinnwald-Cinovec in here. But Zinnwald-Cinovec as a geological unit is actually the largest hard rock lithium deposit worldwide. It's even a little bit bigger than Greenbushes. However, what you can see that it has a significantly lower grade. We're talking about 0.2 to 0.3 weight percent lithium compared to 0.9% in 1.9% in Greenbushes. So those systems, or generally those Greisen systems or rare metal granite systems, are in most cases related to collisional orogenies. Here's one example. I will talk about that also in more detail. The formation, the amalgamation of Pangaea through the collision of Laurasia and Gondwana, and along the suture zone, there are a couple of lithium pegmatite, Greisen, and rare metal granite systems that are mainly exposed in Europe and Northern America. And those melts form primarily through crustal melting. There are also some exceptions, but this is kind of, you have to melt crustal rocks to form these rock types, these granites. In terms of the source, the primary source of these granitic melts are metasediments, and what you need to get an enriched granite at the end, you need a really low degree of melting, because then you fractionate, partition those very incompatible elements very effectively in the small amount, in the small volume of melt. Then there's always a big discussion, particularly for tin, if you need a pre-enriched source or if you can just melt any ordinary sediment. And it's an ongoing discussion. There are two recent papers that claim for tungsten in Northern America and for tin in Central Europe that you need a pre-enriched source, so already a metasedimentary protolith which is already pre-enriched in tin. And in terms of lithium enrichment, there's a big discussion ongoing if you kind of just can melt material with a low degree of melting and then form lithium pegmatites or lithium enriched melts, or if you need kind of a multi-step process, meaning you have to melt a crystallized melt or already enriched S or A-type granite again to get those sometimes extreme enrichments in lithium. My take-home message from this is there is a lot of ongoing research and a lot of uncertainty. So this is still there's a lot of debate going on. So after we produce the melt, another really important process is fractional crystallization, where all these elements that I mentioned that are enriched in these systems, and those systems are incompatible elements. So fractional crystallization will enrich them, and factors that control the degree of enrichment are the thickness of the crust. So the thicker the crust, the longer the melts can fractionate. And also what is really important are flux elements. And many of those elements that I mentioned before are flux elements. So water, of course, but also lithium, fluorine, they all suppress the solidus of the granitic melts. And this means that you can fractionate longer. And there's a really nice paper, a recent paper from McCaffrey and Jowett. They reviewed data on primarily pegmatite systems globally, and they showed nicely that the pegmatite systems, which are really enriched in critical minerals, that they underwent a certain degree of undercooling. So because they were suppressed by fluxes in the melt. And this is specific to Greisen system, not for because we are in the hydrothermal realm. There is another step where you can enrich your system in certain elements. If you have the coexistence of fluids and melts and melt, then certain elements will fractionate into the fluid. And what you can see here, for instance, lithium and tungsten, tin, moly, those are all elements that fractionate into the fluid phase. So the exsolution of the fluid phase and in this case is also another effective process that enriches, may lead to ore formation. So that was my general introduction on the general part on how you enrich certain elements in those rare metal granite systems. The next part is on the specific example of the Erzgebirge. And what you see here is the Sadisdorf. It's a collapse open pit. So it's basically due to historic mine workings, and they collapsed and formed this open pit structure. So the European Variscides are basically erosional windows of basement rocks. They are typically in the range of 360 to 320 million years old, or the metamorphic overprint. And there are a couple of these in Europe. The Erzgebirge is a part of the Bohemian Massif. Then very famous, of course, Cornwall, the French Massif Central that you can see here in central France, and the Iberian Massif in Portugal and Spain. And all these provinces are genetically related to the amalgamation of Pangea, what I already previously mentioned. So the collision of Laurasia and Gondwana that occurred at around 340 million years before present. And this is a pretty busy map, but I will guide you through it. It's the a map of the Erzgebirge Krušný hory. I will always use these double names because the Erzgebirge Krušný hory spans across the German and Czech Czech border. So Krušný hory is just the Czech name for Erzgebirge, which means ore mountain. And you can see here that this is the erosional window. We have Cainozoic units to the south. It's basically one rift shoulder of a rift of the Cainozoic Egergraben rift, which is down here. And you can see that they're basically all the gray units are metamorphic rocks that from high-grade gneisses to low-grade phyllites that have been intruded by igneous units, granitic units that are shown in red. The main igneous exposure is the Eibenstock granite. I showed you a picture of that granite before. It's in the southwest. And what you can see here in the east is the Teplice Altenberg Caldera, and those orange colors, they are volcanics. So here we are looking at a shallower level. We're looking at the volcanics. They're of similar or almost similar age as the igneous, the magmatic, the plutonic rocks in the southwest. The symbols are, so there are different styles of deposits in the Erzgebirge. What you can see here as triangles are tin skarn systems. What you can see as blue circles are occurrences of lithium mica, and all the dark blue dots are lithium mica occurrences which are currently under exploration. What you can also see here, and this is not so important for this talk, but it's another discussion. You can also have Greisen systems which are not enriched in lithium. They're primarily dominated by muscovite, such as Gottesberg and Tannenberg here on the western side of the Eibenstock granite. And on the right side, you can just see an enlarged image of the Teplice Altenberg Caldera. This is the kind of the part that I'm going to focus on in this talk. So the Sadisdorf deposit is up here, or prospect is up here, and the Zinnwald-Cinovec deposit is here, straddling across the border. So Zinnwald is the German part, and Cinovec is the Czech part of that geological structure. So to give you a better idea on that Teplice Altenberg Caldera, so the caldera rim is basically that dark orange part here. It's interpreted as a ring dike, and in terms of timing relative to the caldera formation, what you can see here is a compilation of geochronological data that is available for the Teplice Altenberg Caldera area. And there has been a lot of debate on how that system formed, because there were a lot of imprecise and not really robust age dates out there historically. But there has been a recent paper by Tichomirova et al., and she dated a lot of these rocks with high precision uranium lead TIMS on ID TIMS on zircon. And you can see these ages, those orange ages, have a really small uncertainty, and they eventually now make sense and are not in conflict with cross-cutting relationships. So basically, this is was really helpful. And what you can see here are uranium lead cassiterite LiCPMS ages that my PhD student Dino obtained. And you can see that the formation, the hydrothermal, or the ore formation and the formation of those tin lithium tungsten granites is related to the post-caldera stage, where several kind of granitic plaques stocks intruded that caldera after it collapsed. This is a nice two cross sections, David versus Goliath. So up here you can see the Zinnwald-Cinovec deposit, and down here you can see the Sadisdorf prospect. And you can already see that it's the same scale. So Zinnwald-Cinovec is huge and Sadisdorf pretty small. What you can see here is in green, what is shown here in green is Greisen alteration. What is shown in this light pink tone is albertization, a sodic alteration. I will talk about it later in more detail. So you can see that we are looking at granitic cupulas, and the uppermost part of these cupulas is highly altered and metasomatized to Greisen. The reason why I'm going to show you actually more data on Sadisdorf is because from a perspective, if you want to understand these systems, Zinnwald-Cinovec is not really a good candidate to study, because you can see that already all the distal part is already eroded. And in Sadisdorf, you can see that it's a system which is much better preserved. So kind of if you want to study spatial variability in the system, it's much better to use a system where you have all the components preserved. So this is just like an overview slide on the ore mineralogy, and I now just focus on the three most important commodities in the Erzgebirge. So the lithium is all related to lithium mica, Zinnwaldite, which is basically a biotite. You can see it here, like shiny, dark. Tin is related or is hosted by cassiterite. It's hosted by pervasive Greisen alteration, as well as veins and stockworks. And there's also wolframite that is in some of these deposits of economic significance, whereas in some it's just really low. So this is now Sadisdorf. What you can see here is a granitic rock that crops out here, but it's a composite granite. There were at least 4 different stages, intrusive stages, and what is cropping out here is one of the earliest intrusive stages, and the actual hydrothermal stage and the mineralization is associated with the latest, with G4, sort of the youngest granitic intrusion. And again, here it's only shown the endogreisen, but all the green part here that you see in these two cross sections is the strong, like, complete Greisenization. And this is just to give you a better idea how the rocks actually look. So what you can see here from A to C are the endocontact Greisens. So Greisen that are overprinting the granitic cupola. What you see here in D is a pegmatitic cap. It's called the Stockscheider, which means the separator of the stock, and separating it from the host rock. And then there is a breccia zone that you can see here. It's also mineralized with lithium and tin. And there is a stockwork zone, which is primarily mineralized with tin and subordinately, or to a lesser extent, with lithium. So you go from the endocontact to kind of the pegmatitic cap to the exocontact, where you have primarily in the exocontact, most of the Greisen alteration is related to veins and stockwork, yeah. What we also investigated is the mineralogy of the different veins. So you have veins in the endocontact, which overprint the earlier stage Greisen. and veins in the exocontact, obviously, what I already mentioned. And there are different mineral associations. So what we can observe is that there are oxide veins, which are characterized by cassiterite, wolframite, and a little bit of molybdenite sometimes, and Zinnwaldite mica. Then there is like a transitional association, and then there are these sulfide veins, which have a lot of chalcopyrite, tennantite, sphalerite, and typically muscovite and not lithium mica. And then there's a most in a very distal and also younger event. It is related to the same magmatic event, but I'll talk about this later in more detail. There's a kind of veins that are primarily characterized by fluoride and some clay. This is probably too small that you can actually see something on those photos. But anyway, this is how the veining looks like. And you see that most of the veins have this distinct dark halo. And those oxide veins, they have also in the halo, in the alteration halo, cassiterite and Zinnwaldite, not only in the vein. This is just one cross-section through the Sadisdorf system. And what you can see here is in blue, the distribution of the oxide veins, in orange, the distribution of the oxide sulfide veins, so the transitional association, and in green, the distribution of the sulfide veins. And since fluoride is also kind of overprinting everything, we did not show this on this diagram. But it already shows pretty clearly that there is also like the spatial relationship that I just mentioned. So you have sulfide veins more distal to, whereas the oxide veins occur proximal. This is really just in a nutshell. I could probably also show you more diagrams on that, but I decided to keep it short here. That's the fluid inclusion data that Dino obtained on Sadisdorf, and each of those points are actually fluid inclusion assemblages. So not each of those the error bars that you see here is the range within the fluid inclusion and not the actual error bar. So here only shown fluid inclusion assemblages, and the color code is similar to what I've shown you before. So oxide veins, sulfide veins in green, oxide veins in blue, and oxide sulfide veins in orange. And the late stage fluoride is shown here in purple. And what you can see here is that, well, basically the interpretation is that we had an initial magmatic fluid somewhere here around 7 to 8 weight % salinity, high temperature, and then kind of this developed into a high salinity and a low salinity fluid, or high density, low density fluid, which we interpret as boiling. You can also see heterogeneous fluid inclusions. And in terms of the overall temporal evolution, you can see a distinct cooling trend from that early assemblages to the fluoride assemblage. And this is basically what the genetic model looks like. So from the fluid inclusion work and the petrographic work that we did, Dino came up with that model here. You can see that in that early stage, the system was still confined. Greisen formation took place in the cupola only. And at some point, the carapace of the system failed due to kind of overpressure, and that caused the phase separation into a brine and a vapor phase and the vein formation. And the late stage of the system represents an isothermal retreat. So because the causative intrusion crystallized, cooled, then you retreat your isotherms towards depth. So what I'm going to show you next is we're still only focusing on the Sadisdorf system, but I would like to share a really exciting mica trace element and boron isotope study with you. And I showed you it in this kind of chronology because this is how we also did it, because we said, okay, before we analyze the trace elements, we want to make sure that we have a good understanding on the system in terms of fluid inclusions, temperature, and pyrogenesis. And then we selected the samples according to that. So we included igneous mica related to the granitic intrusions. We included a mica from the albitized granite, the sodic altered granite, and we included a lot of mica from the Greisen zones. And within the Greisen zones, we covered the whole extent from proximal to distal. And what I can show you in this talk is really also just a glimpse, because otherwise it would just be overwhelming. As you can see, we submitted a paper a month ago, so it's under review, and I hope that I can soon share that it's published. What you see here is fluorine versus lithium, and we color-coded the micas in terms of magmatic to magmatic transitional in red and purple tones. The hydrothermal stage is colored in blue codes, so this makes it a little bit easier to read those diagrams. In green, this is the muscovite related to the very distal and late stage. So this is kind of always, you have to consider it kind of separately, so it's not part of that. And you can also see that in terms of, we can see a certain trend from towards increasing lithium and fluorine within our micas, except this late stage muscovite, which kind of is a different story. And here are just two examples or two diagrams that show nicely a fractionation trend or an enrichment trend of what you can see here from the magmatic stage in red towards the hydrothermal stage. What you can see here in those red tones, those are micas related to the pegmatite cap, and we are not really sure if they are transitional or if they're hydrothermal. So this is also something which is pretty difficult to constrain. This is why at least they're somehow transitional. This is why they always plot in the hydrothermal, more in the hydrothermal field. And again, this late stage muscovite is you can see that this is off or represents a different trend than the lithium mica from the magmatic and Greisen samples. On the right diagram, you see something that is also important, the effect of co-precipitation. So counterintuitively, the hydrothermal micas that are actually coeval with the tin mineralization, they show lower tin contents compared to the igneous micas. And that's something that also previous authors already observed, that those micas that co-precipitate with the cassiterite, cassiterite competes with those micas for the tin, so they usually have lower tin composition, lower tin contents than the magmatic micas. What is shown on these diagrams, that's a little bit complicated to explain. So what we did here is we used partition coefficients from experiments to calculate the activities, or better, I would say, guesstimate or estimate the activities of the fluids related to the micas. And what you can see, this is just a selection of some elements. You see here lithium, tin, tungsten, niobium, zinc, and magnesium. And in terms of lithium, although our lithium grades and probably also the content of lithium in the fluid decreases, the activity of lithium is more or less constant. I'll explain that when we talk about zinc in a second. And you can see probably the effect of co-precipitation with tin nicely, because probably the concentration of the fluid in terms of tin decreases. However, in the distal part, you don't form cassiterite anymore, and this is why the activity of tin increases. Tungsten is probably, that's an effect of temperature, but that's also just a guess because tungsten, the geochemistry of tungsten, the hydrogeochemistry of tungsten is not really well defined. And zinc is really interesting because you see that zinc increases towards the distal parts. So, oh, sorry, I should explain. The pale, it's again like the what you see here in those diagrams, the pale blue box, those are micas related to Greisen, then micas related to oxide veins, oxide sulfide veins along that trend, and that represents a spatial trend. So we go from endocontact to exocontact to distal. And again, the muscovite has to be regarded separately. But in terms of zinc, I want to point that out because that's maybe easier to understand what I mean with activity and the difference between activity and concentration. Because many in the literature you find often, or there's often a misuse between these terms. So zinc increases towards the kind of distal parts, which is most likely not the concentration. The concentration probably just stays constant for the initial part, but the activity increases because you dilute the system, cool it down, which destabilizes zinc chlorocomplexes, and therefore the activity of zinc increases. And this is what you can see in the micas. And niobium shows an opposite trend. And for instance, zinc, niobium, and tungsten would be good candidates to use as vectors towards the center of the mineralized system, because they show this continuous trend. So if you would imagine that you have two drill cores, one is somewhere here and one is somewhere here, then it shows you a certain gradient and might be helpful in exploration targeting. Magnesium tells a different story. Magnesium tells a nice story on the host rock. So the host rock, the intrusion itself is very low in magnesium. The host rock is very high in magnesium, and we can see that within the mica compositions. This is again just a really short glimpse on boron isotopes. So this is actually the second study worldwide that will present LICPMS data of in situ boron isotope compositions in mica. And since we already got all the data from our previous studies, we kind of turned it around and say, okay, the boron isotopic system is not very well studied. We have our constraining parameters, and then we see if the boron isotopes make sense way around. And this is what kind of the summary diagram. What you can see here is the boron isotopic compositions. It's the mean value of each of those groups. So again, micas related to granitic rocks, micas related to Greisen. And in the Greisen, what you can see is that there is a bimodal distribution. We have some mica Greisens that have pretty low boron isotopic compositions and some micas that have relatively high mica compositions. And then we have primarily cooling, and then probably a little bit of Rayleigh fractionation in the end. And this is kind of the temperature profile that is related. And again, we go from proximal on the left to distal on the right. And you can see that not much is happening up here, only a little bit. But what the boron isotopes really nicely record is the opening of the system. So this Greisen mica is basically formed during a closed system, and this mica is related to after the carapace failed and the system opened and boiled. Okay, now I have just a few 4 slides or so on Zinnwald-Cinovec. Again, it is the much more important deposit. However, you could not do such a study as I showed you before because we only have the endocontact, or primarily the endocontact, preserved. Again, as a reminder, we are here in the at the border between Germany and the Czech Republic, and you can see here also in terms of scale that you have like a massive alteration zone in the cupola of that relatively big granite stock. And this is how Zinnwald looks, and it's really a lot of fun to go underground in the historic mine because you have a border down there. This is the German and Czech border underground. There's even a little fence, but you can just walk across it. And since the EU, it's anyway not a problem to travel from one to the other side. What you see there in the uppermost part, so the historic mine, they mainly targeted tin, and they mined this high-grade tin related to these coarse-grained veins. They are sub-horizontal veins. However, the veins, they were the probably primary fluid flow paths, but they are associated with massive alteration in the hanging and the footwall. So all what you can see here is Zinnwaldite mica. And here on that side, that's the Czech side, and you can see that there is a very high, high abundance of mica in that zone, but also those the white rock is all Zinnwaldite rich Greisen. And here's some coarse-grained Zinnwaldite in one of these sub-horizontal beds. What I briefly mentioned before, but not really explained it, is that you have counterintuitively, I mean, I mentioned that Greisen alteration dissolves feldspar, but what you can see in all those systems is actually a sodic and sometimes sodic potassic alteration. And this is a photo of a rock which contains primarily albite plus quartz. This is an earlier stage similar to like a porphyry system where you have the sodic alteration below the actual ore zone. This is kind of, in a way, similar in Greisen systems. So this is the deepest part. However, some of that metasomatic, so it's a metasomatic rock, and some of that albitic rock has also economic grades of lithium. So it contains also Zinnwaldite. This is on the kind of a diagram that shows you what I already mentioned. So there was in the 60s, there was on the Czech side a research borehole, and this is the data that is related to a borehole that drilled down to 1,600 meters. And this is kind of the best exposure of the transition between the metasomatized zone in the upper part and the unaltered granite in the lower part. And the transition of alteration, or the metasomatic part, is associated with a transition from lithium anide to Zinnwaldite. And it is also, you can see it also in lithium grades. So below the metasomatic zone, you have maximum lithium contents of 0.1 weight percent, whereas above you usually have like above 0.3 something. And on the right side, you can see a resource model which shows the lithium distribution in Zinnwald. Again, it's separated because two companies operate it. German company and Czech company. And below the main ore zone, there is this sodic alteration. However, the upper part of that sodic alteration is also included in that resource model. There are also, Greisens have also the potential for other critical metals such as niobium and tantalum. You can see a diagram on that left side. However, the highest concentrations of niobium and tantalum occur in the uppermost part of the unmetasomatized granite. There is some potential for scandium. There's a nice paper from Reus et al. You can see here that the scandium correlates with the with lithium, basically. So with the high grade lithium zones, you have also scandium. So that would be a good thing to also extract it as a byproduct. So that brings me kind of to the end of my talk. I have two more slides. This is kind of the summary of what I've told you already. The Greisen systems are kind of the product of a complex magmatic and hydrothermal evolution, and that usually results in a distinct anatomy. unaltered granite at depth, which transitions into that sodic potassic alteration zone. This is associated with the transition from lithium anide to Zinnwaldite. And that sodic zone transitions gradually into a Greisen altered zone. And typically, if the system is fully preserved, you have the endocontact Greisen zone, a stockwork zone, and then a pretty distal vein zone. And the metals are distributed unevenly or kind of concentrated in different parts of that zone. So lithium, most of the lithium is concentrated in the endocontact zone, whereas most of the tin, for instance, and tungsten is in the uppermost part of that endocontact zone, but also primarily in that stockwork and vein zone. So in general, those systems have been traditionally only researched from the lens of tin and tungsten, but there is a lot of potential for lithium, obviously, and also other critical metals. And preservation is an important thing to consider because sometimes you do not have all those components preserved. And a big question is, when you remember what I showed you in that great tonnage diagram, some of those Greisen systems are super small and only Zinnwald-Cinovec is really big. So a big question would be what actually controls the size of those systems. This is still, we're kind of still looking for answers. Coming back to like a little bit of a global conclusion, what is always interesting is to combine the different areas, provinces of the European Variscides. What you can see here is that in the Erzgebirge and Cornwall, you have primarily Greisen-hosted systems, tin, tungsten, lithium, whereas in France, you have Greisen, rare metal granites, and pegmatites, and most of the lithium resource in Portugal, for instance, is related to pegmatites. So this is, I think, a great opportunity to kind of put all these different expressions into context and to come up with a kind of more holistic or bigger picture of those systems. And with this, I think I'm already a couple minutes over my time. I would like to thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much. That was brilliant. I learned so much today, so thank you.